Welcome back. In this video we're going to show you the Generative Shape Design app, which is our third CATIA app. And we're going to show you how it can be useful to shape the geometry of your model. We'll demonstrate this by creating a basic geometry for a pair of wings. So let's take a look at how Generative Shape Design fits with the apps we've already used in CATIA. So far in these videos, we've been working within the Assembly Design app and the Part Design app. Now the distinction between these two is fairly clear. The Assembly Design app is there to help you to manage the relationships between the parts that make up your assembly, while the Part Design app focuses on the geometry of the individual parts in that assembly. Now the Generative Shape Design app serves as a companion to the Part Design app by allowing you to approach the geometry of your model from a different perspective. And the distinction comes from how we define the geometry. Part Design app is going to focus itself on volumes, or holes in the volumes, while the Generative Shape Design app focuses on the wireframe, so the lines and the points and surfaces that can make up a model. By using these two apps together, we can gain a whole lot more functionality in what we can do in CATIA as we model our parts. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at that so I can show you what I mean. Alright, so right here I have already started in CATIA a new assembly. So essentially I just came into my dashboard here, and without selecting anything within my collaborative space, went straight to Assembly Design to open up a brand new assembly. And I'm just going to set up this assembly like I've done before. And I do this just so that we can get used to this idea. The first thing to go in is a 3D shape, immediately under the assembly header. And this time I'm actually not going to put in a subassembly. Whether or not you use a subassembly to organize your parts is up to you and up to your team. They can help in organizing the efforts that your team goes through and organizing who is in charge of what aspects of your geometry. But let's just go ahead and I'm just going to put in a part directly underneath the 3D shape at the top of my assembly. And just to push that point a little bit further, I'm actually going to rename my 3D shape. So I'm going to right click on that, Properties, change this title under the Reference tab into Wireframe. Now again, we're going to come back to this wireframe when we cover relational design in a future video. For right now, I'm just going to rename it to wireframe and leave it there. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's get into making this wing. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to activate the 3D shape that's part of that first part that I put into this assembly. And you notice when I did that, it sent me straight into Part Design. That's the assumed app that I'm going to be working in when I start defining a geometry. But I want to focus on the sketches that are going to make up this part, rather than the volumes. So I'm going to come up here to my compass and I'm just going to switch myself over to Generative Shape Design. Now I have this saved in my favorite app so I can switch quickly between Part Design and Generative Shape Design while I'm working in CATIA. But if you don't have it saved into your favorites, just come in the 3D section of your compass, just go ahead and scroll down. You can find it down here. Here's mine. Click on that, and it's now sent me into Generative Shape Design, and you notice that the tools along the bottom here have changed as well. I'm going to go back into the Essentials toolbox because that's most likely what you're going to see when you start it up. Now notice a few of these buttons are going to be the same that we've been using in Part Design. We're just going to reuse this Position Sketch tool, make sure we get it on the plane that we want. And I'm going to put in here quote-unquote airfoil. Now I can't stress this enough, what I'm creating here is not an actual airfoil, and you should not try to create an airfoil freehand like I'm doing here. But this is going to serve our purposes well enough for what I'm doing here today, so I'm just going to create a basic shape here using the spline tool that we can pretend is our actual airfoil. And we'll go over how to import an actual airfoil later. Alright, so there's my impromptu airfoil. I'll go ahead and exit that Sketcher app. And now what we can see here is we have this sketch. Now, what I'm about to show you is only available to you in Generative Shape Design. Because we're focusing on the sketches and the lines and the points and such, I can actually now manipulate this sketch in ways that I can't in Part Design. So first things first, I need to create an endpoint for this wing I'm about to create. So I'm gonna actually create a plane off of this middle set, drag it out here. I'm actually gonna put that at 180. This is gonna be a very short wing, but I'm doing that so that we can see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing while I'm working on it. And now what I want to do is I'm gonna create another sketch on this new plane, and I want to create a point that's going to define the end point of this wing. So I'm going to put it out here, and then what I'm going to do is hold down Control, and then I'm going to select that very end tip point on that old sketch, and I'm going to come down here to the Constraint tool, but instead of selecting the Constraint tool here, I'm going to go behind it in this drop-down menu and go to Constraints Defined in Dialog Box, and I'm going to set those to be coincident. And what you can see now, if I can tilt this, is these points actually now line up on top of each other. Essentially, they're as close to each other as I can get while still being on two separate planes, meaning that they will line up perfectly. And I can put that back in normal view and you'll see those line up. Alright, so I'll exit that sketcher, and now I have everything set up so I can now transform our old sketch. So I'm going to come down here to the Transform section of my toolbox, and I'm going to select Translate. And now I can define how I'm going to translate. I'm actually going to say point to point. I'm going to set my start point as that end point again of that airfoil, and then my end point is that new one I just created. Basically, I'm just saying we're going to move this sketch where that point is the same in both sketches. Select OK, and now I have that end airfoil there. But what I want to do here is actually get a little bit more creative. I want to make a tapered wing. So I'm going to come down here to Translate, go to that drop-down menu, and I'm going to go to Scaling. You notice there's other things I can do here. I can rotate a sketch. I can make a symmetrical sketch. I'm going to do a scaled sketch. I'm going to select this new translated sketch that we just created. I'm going to set a reference point, basically just pick one point that stays in the same place. I'm going to pick that end point again because I want the trailing edge of this airfoil to stay flat. And then I'm going to set this to be a little bit extreme on the ratio, perhaps, for how short this wing is, just 0.75, and hit OK. Now you notice, shrink that sketch down, and now I can just right-click on the sketch and hit Hide. And now I've got the starting profile and the end profile of my wing there. So now we've seen me manipulate sketches in Generative Shape Design. That's something that you can't actually do in part design because, again, part design focuses on the solid volumes of your part. So while you can make a symmetry of a hole or of a volume in part design, you can't do that with sketches. So this is something that we have available here in Generative Shape Design. So the next thing I want to do is turn this into a solid wing. Now I said solid, so I want to make sure that I switch back over into part design so that I have those solid shaping tools. Now something to keep in mind here is you do notice there's a volume tab on this toolbar down here. And I want to talk about this so that nobody gets confused down the road. Volumes in Generative Shape Design are reference volumes. They're not designed to represent the actual physical geometry of the part after it's been created. And they're different in CATIA than solids, which you can create in the Part Design app. They're treated differently in CATIA, and you're going to save yourself a whole lot of trouble by not creating volumes here, but by switching back over to the Part Design app so that we can create a solid geometry here. And all I have to do, I'm here in the Model section, so we've got Essentials. I'm going to come over to the Model section of my toolbar and select a multi-section solid. And what this does is it just lets me pick solids, and it's going to create kind of a steep curve between the two, just a smooth curve from one to the next. That looks okay. I'm going to hit OK. And there we have that tapered wing from my initial sketch, my initial airfoil, down to my scaled airfoil. These types of tools become especially useful when you're dealing with airfoils because the airfoils are very difficult to draw, very difficult to scale by hand. But you can do it this way and very quickly get a nice tapered wing like I've created here. Now obviously this wing is way too stumpy, but I wanted to make sure that you can clearly see that it is a tapered wing, and it does get scaled down. Alright, so let's look at what else we can do with this wing now that we have it. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a mirrored wing of this side one. Now this is going to be, looking at it now, that's going to be the port side, so we need a starboard wing over here. And what you might be tempted to do is, now that we're in part design, is just click on this. I'm going to drop down this part of the tree. Click directly on the multi-section solid, and I can come down here in part design to transform, say mirror, go across that center. And that looks like we've just created a separate wing. But remember that as far as the part tree is concerned, this is all one part. And if you want to manufacture and be able to assemble these wings separately, we don't want this to be set up as one part. So instead of mirroring it within part design, I want to double click again on my assembly, and I'm going to make an assembly symmetry of that part. Now I want to make sure I don't have any of the geometry in here selected when I do this. I'm just going to hit the assembly symmetry button, and then I'm going to actually click on, rather than clicking on the geometry here, click on the physical part itself, and then I'm going to click on a plane or a surface to mirror it across, and it will create another part. I'll hit OK. You notice it's now added a symmetrical part into my model, and I'll show you why that's cool in a second here. Let's say that instead of creating a solid wing like this, so maybe this is a foam wing, I'm more interested in creating the shell of that wing. Well, that's not too hard. I'm going to reactivate my 3D shape for this part, select that multi-section solid, and just hit delete on my keyboard. And instead of that solid, now notice that the scaling is hiding, so I'm going to make that visible again. Instead of creating that, I'm going to go back into Generative Shape Design, and we're going to create a surface instead. So let's jump back into Generative Shape Design. And this time, I'm going to go into the Surface tool, and instead of creating a multi-section solid, we're going to create a multi-section surface. Now this is going to be just the surface, so it has 0 thickness. If I look down here, you can actually see that's hollow in there. So it's an infinitely thin surface. But what I can do is I can use that surface to define some geometry that I create in part design. So again, I'm going to jump back over into part design so that we can make this geometry. Now you can do a lot of different things with this. I could create a sketch here in part design, and I could pad some geometry and have it come up to the surface so that it meets that curve exactly. I can do that on the inside as well as the outside. So if I want to create ribs, I could use the surface to define the outside geometry of the ribs within my airfoil. But what I want to create here is actually just the outer shell. So this would be the carbon fiber, the fiberglass, whatever shell that we're putting on here. So I'm in part design now. I'm in this 3D shape. I'm going to come back over to model and do a thick surface, this tool right here. And basically what it wants is I just need a surface here. And I actually don't want it to come out, I want it to go in. So I'm going to reverse that direction. Select preview. Okay, so now we have a 1 millimeter thick surface going around that wing. Now you might notice this light gray, dark gray kind of zebra pattern here. All that's saying is that I've got that super thin surface right on top of the gray surface. So I actually am going to come back, I'm just going to hide that. And now I can see there's physical geometry there representing the outer skin of that wing. You might notice if I turn this around, this other side is set to be symmetrical. It just hasn't updated yet, so it's not hollow yet. So I'm going to go back, double click on my assembly and select update, and there it is. We now have the hollow skin of our tapered wing. Alright, and that is it for our intro tutorial to Generative Shape Design. Now it's going to come up again in some of the other tutorials that we do, but hopefully this gives you the basics of what you need to get started using the tool.